Tonight calls for a review of the law which gives the president a free hand in choosing his ministers from parliament is resurfacing on the back of an NCCE research findings which indicate parliament is doing a woeful job keeping the executive in check. Former Shraj boss Justice Emil Short is one of those who believe appointing ministers from parliament is retrogressive and weakens its oversight over the executive. Majority Leader Alban Bagbin is also of the view that to make the legislature more effective, the law which mandates the president to choose his ministers from parliament must be reviewed. So how effective would parliament be if ministers are not appointed from there? And are there other institutional lapses weakening parliament's oversight responsibility over the executive? This is today's big story with me, Stephen Enti. The effectiveness of Parliament in checking the executive is key in any governance structure. However, in Ghana, Parliament's ability to check the executive by scrutinizing bills and agreements for value for money, among others, has been lagging behind. According to research findings from the National Commission for Civic Education, NCCE, Parliament is doing a woeful job in keeping the executive arm of government in check, and there are several reasons for this trend, one of which is the appointment of ministers from Parliament, which many believes weakens its oversight role. Let's first hear from Majority Leader Alban Bagbin, who spoke on the matter today.
Well, I definitely support the total separation of powers. I don't think it's a threat to our democratic process. We did not have sufficient time historically to assess the performance of those institutions. But I think we're misled by that historical record to try and put in place a system that is not workable. If you have members of parliament elected as members of parliament to perform the sole duty of members of parliament, and then the executive arm elected to execute, the president is the one that has authority to appoint people outside parliament, I believe the two organs will now focus on performing those functions, unlike what we have, where as human beings it's naturally impossible for a minister of state to be effective as a minister of state and also be effective as a member of parliament. It's not possible. And so we just need to do away with that system. We need to strengthen parliament, we need to strengthen the executive, and we need to strengthen the judiciary so that they can balance each other to try as much as possible correctly define what the national interest is with inputs from the people. And so I am for complete separation of powers.
But Honorable, you will also bear with me that if you look at what we have in Ghana now, every party sends its best foot forward. And so the best people, the most capable hands are in parliament. If the president would have to choose people from outside parliament, you think he would get the best people to work with?
Oh, yes. I'm very, very sure. It's not the best people that are in parliament. There are many more, in fact, better people outside parliament, very capable people outside parliament. Because of the roughness of the campaigns and the way we conduct our politics, there are so many people who are unwilling to subject themselves to this total verbal abuse, you know. And so we have a lot of capable people outside parliament, and the president can easily get, whether it's gender or whatever, he can get the people to balance his government.
Wait, this one. Right, so we were joined on the telephone line now by former Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Professor Michael Quay, who also has very strong views on the effectiveness of Parliament's oversight over the executive. Good evening, Prof, and thanks for your time on today's big story.
Thank you, good evening.
So, do you also believe the president's free hand in choosing MPs to be ministers is killing the oversight role of the House?
So yes, now it's constitutional arrangement as of now. It's the majority of ministers.
Prof, I'll be grateful if you could raise your voice a bit. We're not hearing you very well.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The majority of ministers, as at the present constitutional arrangement, to come from Parliament. That's 50% plus 1 is enough. Now, this, we said, has got a lot of problems. Then the problem is that the executive must be apart from the legislature. In order that the legislature should be very effective. You know, and this is the U.S. presidential system. We had a presidential system, and yet started to go hybrid by way of combining two, and that's not help them. Every member of parliament on the majority side is looking over his shoulder to the class of house or castle, where he may be beckoned to be given a post. That means your progress, your political development is tied with your becoming a minister. And of course, if the majority in parliament are all looking forward to the president to give them position, how can they be checking him? And this is a fundamental issue. Honorable Babin holds this strong view. The minority leader, Chairman Barusu, holds it. I hold it. A number of people who are very committed to Parliament as an institution hold this view. Today, reference was made to the Liman time when, because there was a complete dichotomy between Parliament and executive, there was an instance where even the president's own party people rejected his budget. They were voting according to conscience. And then when it was what they were complaining about was remedy, then they voted for it. It shows you that that separation helps. We are today in Ghana not building what one may call a parliamentary career. What in America is called senatorial career. The typical senator does not want to be a member of the cabinet. President Kennedy's brother, Edward, was a senior senator for some 40 years. Today we have turned the whole thing into just a place to go temporary and then get some posts if necessary and so on. Parliamentary career must become a state of the art, and people must seek it, they must work it, and they must improve in it, and they must develop in it, and Ghana should benefit from their expertise. So we are not taking Parliament seriously. And if we continue to act as if it's an appendage of the executive, we shall not do this country any good service.
Right, Prof. I'll hold you briefly. Dr. Rashid Rahman, who is the Executive Director of the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs, ACEPA, is joining us on the line. Doc, good evening.
Good evening.
Now, you were at the NCCE launching of the research findings. What is your center's evaluation of the effectiveness of Parliament's oversight role?
Well, I think what our center's impressions are, I think, is that what we heard today is very consistent with what we have been saying to our Parliament. In 2011, when I was head of the Parliamentary Center, we did what was called the African Parliamentary Index. It was a research report that is similar to the NCCE report, but in this case, it was one that compared 7 countries across the continent, from East Africa to Southern to West Africa. And when it came to the issue of financial oversight and holding the government to account in terms of its stewardship of our resources, Ghana was last. Ghana ranked last out of the 7 countries. That was 2011. Today we are in 2015, and we are still talking about the same thing. So what I heard today, I think, was not a surprise to me.
Well, Doc, we'll be returning to you to have a broader discussion of the issues that the NCC covered. Of course, we know we have been focusing on one of the things which some people believe that the appointment of ministers from Parliament is part of the reasons why Parliament's oversight responsibility is weakening. So we'll be returning to you for the discussion. But in the studio now, we have the Deputy Chairman of the NCCE, Samuel Ekwamwa, who is joining us. Good evening, sir, and thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you.
I'm curious, tell me the key thrust of the research, what the research findings entails.
Well, the research looked at the effectiveness of Parliament. In fact, whether the way the public assesses the role of Parliament, the performance of parliamentarians in their work. It also looked at how Parliament itself puts itself out for public assessment.
So, I mean, what I asked you earlier was that what were the major findings of this research? You've told us what the research sought to do, and so after you conducted the research, what sample size? What was the method that you employed in this research, and what was your sample size?
Okay, the sample size, we dealt with 2,910 respondents. In fact, we had a plan to cover 3,000, but we had 2,910 coming back. Okay, and it covered 72 districts out of the 216.
So that was a very sizable number and a broad range of evaluation which you did through this research. So your findings, one of them is that Parliament's oversight responsibility over the executive is weakening by the day, that Parliament is not doing a great job in checking the executive.
That was one of the issues that came up. The issue about parliamentarians even putting the party interest first against the national interest also came up. The issue about the widening gap in terms of gender, the underrepresentation of women in Parliament also came up. And then even the issue of corruption.
Perceived corruption in the House.
Perceived corruption in the House. And even the corruption itself as an obstacle to the MPs in the performance of their duty also came up in the
right. So I'll quickly go back to Dr. Rashid Draman, who is still on the line. So, Doc, I know you were at the event today, and you, as Mr. Ekwamwa has raised, he has pointed us to some of the indicators in this research. So you say that you were not surprised at all with some of the findings. Why do you say so?
Well, I say so because, in my job, I have worked with this parliament, our parliament in Ghana here for, I think, more than 15 years, if I can count. And I also advise and provide training to many parliaments around the world, in Africa and in other parts of the world. And, whenever we go and provide advice, provide support, and suggest reforms and so on, many countries are very quick at embracing those reforms. But in Ghana here, we are embarrassingly slow when it comes to embracing reform. And I say this because, in 2000, as I indicated earlier, in 2011, we did a study that looked at performance of parliaments across the continent. And when I came back here, at that time, Right Honorable Joyce Bamford Addo was Speaker of Parliament, and Honorable Avoka was the Majority Leader. I was called to Parliament and asked, what can we do to improve our scores? What can we do to be like Kenya and Uganda, who did excellently well when we did our survey? Yes, and I told them, we need a budget law, we need an outfit within Parliament that can support members of Parliament in analyzing most of these financial documents and bills that come before the House and so on.
Right.
We are in 2015.
And nothing really has been done so far as
Nothing really has been. Today, Honorable Bagbin spoke about that. We funded in 2009, we funded the draft of a bill, a budget bill, that we were hoping would be the foundation for setting up a budget office within our parliament, so that our members of parliament, before they make any pronouncements on our national budget, before they make pronouncements on any financial document that comes before them, they have gotten some expert advice and some expert support and some expert input.
Right, Doc, we'll hold you. We'll hold you briefly. We're still continuing with the discussion, but Professor Michael Quay is on the line. I don't want to hold him too long. Prof, I need to find out from you. I know that the Constitutional Review Committee made this recommendation to review the law which makes the president have a free hand in choosing his ministers from Parliament. Government has accepted that recommendation. What happened to passing it into law?
Now, just in accepting that, in making that recommendation, I was very surprised at the review committee. I was there. I made proposals and others. It appears we don't want to understand the problem. We don't want to, because we should. We say that this involvement, this bringing together of executive and parliament, weakens parliament. For that matter, let there be a complete separation, like we have seen before in this country, in the 1979 Constitution. Then the recommendation came out to the surprise of most of us, saying that the president should have a free hand in the choice of ministers, whether from parliament or elsewhere, which means by that free hand, he can even appoint 80% from parliament. It means you don't understand the problem. The way to handle the matter is to provide, as in 1979, which we know about, that anyone who is appointed a minister from parliament must resign his position. And this is what others have done. And as the other gentleman is referring to, in Uganda, Nigeria, and other places, to ensure that there is a real senatorial parliamentary career.
But Prof, I believe that this is just one of the many drawbacks on the effectiveness of Parliament. For example, there are those who have argued that the quality of MPs itself, it's a problem in Parliament, that this is affecting the quality of debate and the quality of their participation in the legislative process in general. So beyond just separation of powers, where we want the president to choose, to be able by law to choose his ministers from outside Parliament. Beyond that, there are also other things which are drawing back Parliament's effectiveness. Don't you think so?
It's true. But I like to regard all those other things as symptomatic. They are symptoms. The real disease is this one. And that is what actually is making a parliamentary career not very attractive to certain categories of people. And also, the fact is that the attrition rate is so high because people have a wrong perception of what Parliament is. In order to make it clear that Parliament is a house of legislation and it is a house of the control of the executive, and putting Parliament in its right place, unless we do that, we'll find this kind of situation haunting us. I believe that the real thing is to ensure that Parliament, for example, has a member of Parliament has government-sponsored offices in his constituency, faithful, not from his money or anything, and staff. They are civil staff, and they are also paid for in a normal way. Offices. It is happening in Nigeria, Uganda, and other places, Kenya. And it's because of this kind of situation that the members of Parliament with the role and function has become rather nebulous. I think we should take Parliament very, very seriously and then provide the ingredients and the input that will allow members of Parliament to perform seriously. If you don't have a computer-backed process, you cannot do that. Many of us, the research that we presented in Parliament, we did them ourselves through our own already existing resources that we had before coming to Parliament. But you cannot rely upon that. These are very, very important issues.
Right, Prof, we're grateful for your time. We know we'll be talking to you more on this subsequently. Very, very grateful that you could join us on today's big story. Professor Michael Quay is a former Deputy Speaker of Parliament and former MP for Domi Kwabena. Mr. Samuel Equiamwa, you're still here. I beg your pardon. Sorry, I skipped your name. Now, beyond the research and the findings that you had, did you spell out specific recommendations you feel Parliament can follow through to improve its work?
Of course. Among the recommendations, we have indicated that there is the need, for instance, for Parliament to engage more and to also, where necessary, legislate.
What do you mean? I mean, engage more and legislate. Parliament already engages in the process of legislation, so they must do more.
They must do more in terms of community engagement with their constituents, for instance. There is a huge gap there. Even though respondents indicated that Parliament is playing the representation role well, in terms of communication, in terms of engagement, direct engagement with their MPs, it was low. So there's a huge gap there. So the recommendation is that Parliament need to help to bridge that gap. We need to take steps to break that gap. And with the issue about gender, the wide gender gap that exists, that also is an issue for Parliament.
That
and
many
other
people want to see more women in Parliament?
Of course, because it is reducing the contribution of women to national development because they are not part of the they are not participating in the decision-making processes at that level.
I see.
They are not making direct input into the work of Parliament at that level because they are underrepresented.
And what role is NCCE playing in all of this? Because I do know that as a country's, a nation's civic education group, you are also responsible for educating people to appreciate some of the core work that Parliament does, or you don't think so?
We have a role, and we have continued to play that role. But ours is to create awareness and to get people to be to act. And this is why today we have taken the matter to Parliament. We have done a research and taken it to them that, look, this is what is happening out there.
And you need to fix it.
You need to fix it.
In order to restore the confidence the public has in you. We are going to continue
our public education and engagement, and where we have to do advocacy, we will do.
Right, Mr. Equiamwa, I'm grateful for your time on today's big story. Mr. Samuel Equiamwa is the Deputy Chairman of the NCCE. Also on the line now is Dr. Alidu Seidu, who is a political science lecturer at the KNUST. Good evening, sir, and thanks for your time.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Now,
I'm at the University of Ghana, not KNUST.
University of Ghana, I beg your pardon, Dr. Alidu Seidu. What do you make of the calls for separation of powers in Parliament?
Yeah, thank you very much. You see, the concept of separation of powers is an old-age concept. But if you look at the complex nature of the governance system, you will tend to believe that we cannot have a complete separation of powers. It is not possible because in the day-to-day businesses of governance, the three arms of government need to cooperate one way or the other to be able to have a synergistic working relationship. I appreciate the concerns raised by these particular people, and I agree very much with them that the current design of our constitution, which says that majority of our ministers must come from the legislature, is doing great disservice to this country because we have competent, capable, able people who can serve better in government. But because of the fact that they have not gone to Parliament, they have not been representing their people, then we overlook them. And we are forced to pick people from Parliament who don't have the necessary experience and expertise as compared to those outside Parliament to perform this particular function. But it is still very difficult because if you look at the design, when you look at the U.S., which practices a strict separation of powers, it is embedded in their constitution. The U.S. Constitution, the framers of the U.S. Constitution designed the Constitution in such a way that it works accordingly to the concept of separation of powers. If you look at the British system where we have fusion of powers, the Constitution to some extent is created to create that flexibility. In Ghana, we say we have a hybrid system or new presidential system, which combines an element of both the presidential and the parliamentary system. So this one alone is a serious cause for concern. We are calling for a complete separation of powers. Now, there are two ways we can introduce bills to the parliament, the legislature, which is the private member and then the one coming from government. How many private member bills have seen the light of day in parliament? It is very difficult, and because
why is it so, Dr. Ali Seidu? I mean, private member bills have not been too successful, like you rightly said. But why is this so?
Because it has to do with the fact that the executive work closely with the legislature, and bills that normally come from the government representative, like a minister of state, it's likely to enjoy the support of the House. And also, there will be a lot of lobbying from the government if it has so much interest in this bill to get it passed. And mostly because people in the legislature work closely with the government, they are more likely to put pressure to get these particular bills passed. But if you are an independent person and you introduce such a bill, it doesn't get that amount of support that it's supposed to get, which goes to signify that it is very difficult working alone without the support of the other arms of government.
Right.
But having said this, I still believe that we will have to have a second look, especially the provision which says that majority of our ministers should come from parliament. It does a lot of great disservice to this country, and competent people who are not members of the legislature are not given the requisite chance to
play a role. Right. Dr. Ali Seidu, we're grateful for your time. Quickly, I know Dr. Rashid Draman is still on the line. Doc, we've held you on for so long. I want to give you the closing remark. I know that we focused on the separation of powers issue, but a lot more came from this research, including more women in parliament, including empowering MPs to be effective in their debates and everything. So if you were to give a snapshot of advice, what would you say?
Well, I have been working with the Parliament of Ghana on the request of the Speaker to help the Parliament set up two key structures or institutions, if you like, within the Parliament. The first one is the Office of Parliamentary Scrutiny, which is an office that is going to play the role that, for instance, the Parliamentary Budget Office in Kenya is playing. That is advising members of Parliament, analyzing bills, analyzing the budget, and so on, before members go into debate. That would address that issue that you raised with Professor Michael Quay.
Right.
The second one is to set up what is called...
Doc, quickly, I need you to wrap up. Our time is up. So
okay. Anyway, so the second one is the Parliamentary Training Institute. And all these are in the works. But as I said, in many parliaments, in many countries around the world, when we give them advice, they take it, they run with it. And I'm just hoping that our country, our parliament will
also
run with
take
it. And then we can make our parliament much more effective than it is right now.
Right. Thanks very much, Dr. Rashid Dramani, for your time on today's Big Story. That's where we wrap. And we'll be back with Joy News Interactive. Do stay.